Oh, yeah. Fish on. Yeah. Oh, my God. Good night. Look at that tank. That's a toad, brother. Golly.
All righty, sir. Well, welcome. We're back at our normal time.
Tuesday, the Tuesday night show. Well, man, listen, guys, before we go very far into this one, I got to say thanks for the amazing response to last week's show. A lot of people reached out, both personally and professionally, so I appreciate the heck out of that. We have got a banger show for y'all tonight. I need y'all to share this link to all your groups, to all your pages. This is going to be a night where we talk about kind of the future of kayak fishing competition. And our guests tonight are Steve Owens from the Bass Nation Kayak Series and AJ McWhorter from the Hobie Bass Open Series. It's going to come to a lot of people as a surprise to a lot of people that the three of us are jumping on the show. But a lot of us behind the scenes have talked for years anyway. You know, if you've been around kayak fishing very long, you realize that there's been headbutting that's happened with certain people in certain places. A lot of times I'm the common denominator in that. When you're out there trying to do things and you're passionate and you're all passionate, and also when you just got brothers, right? Who's got a brother that they haven't ended up butting heads with or in a fight with or whatever? I don't have any brothers, but I spent a bunch of time in the military and I have a lot of people that I consider brothers that I've, we're punching each other in the face, 1 hour and 2 hours later, we're having a drink and talking about it. So all that crap is in the past, and there is a new day dawning in the sport of kayak fishing to where we've got to get more uniformed. We've got to align our rules with each other so anglers aren't making mistakes based on how they thought this event was. They're fishing in a different series, and you guys just shouldn't have to learn, 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different formats. And so this is going to be a step in the right direction. Not everything is going to be 100%. But I dream of a day where there's a unified rules of catch, photo, release, similar to like boxing or MMA or something like that. And so I want to welcome AJ and Steve to the show, and then we're just going to jump into it, man. This is going to be a good show. Like I said, y'all hit up the comment section, grab that link, share it to your groups, tell folks to tune in because we will have a question and answer session at the end. And you got the three amigos of major kayak fishing tournaments here. Steve, AJ, welcome to the show, fellas. Appreciate y'all taking the time.
Welcome. Happy holidays, everybody.
Oh, hey,
good to see y'all.
And Merry Christmas to you guys, since I forgot to mention it. Steve, is that actually your house, or do you have like some staged Merry Christmas like studio that you're shooting this from? Oh, look at you.
Yeah, my wife is like, as soon as the last bite of Thanksgiving dinner's done, all this goes up. So
Gotcha.
Yeah, and it'll come down probably about the second week of January. So
perfect, cool.
Yeah.
And AJ, what's your excuse?
I'm home. I do podcasts at my parents' house when I'm here. It's my dad's office. I got a bunch of jazz vinyl behind me.
Nice.
Drum set out in the other room. My dad's a big jazz drummer, so happy to be home with the family for a couple days.
Well, I just got to go home to Georgia. To Savannah. We're right outside of Savannah, a little town called Eden. Spend that with my family. Unfortunately, everything was frozen. It was a white knuckle drive back home because I drove with my daughter and we drove in her 2-wheel drive Jeep Cherokee. So there was some tense moments last night. I sat on the bridge going on GUNTERSVILLE on 431 for an hour and a half waiting on an accident to clear, and finally made it home last night. Started getting my notes together for tonight's show. And we thawed out in North Alabama now. So we've got running water again and some of those things. So I'm probably going to try to go fishing later this week. So anyway, well, look, guys, we're not going to talk schedules tonight. We're not going to talk any of that. Most of us have got our schedules published. We all shared our schedules as much as we could behind the scenes to avoid, conflicts where if I'm east, you're west, and Steve's south, or if AJ's in the south, Steve's up, over here. And we just did the best we could to balance it with providing as much possible return on investment as we could for our hosts, for our sponsors, for the anglers they're dedicated to our series and all that good stuff. But we've been talking about for years, like differences in rules. And to be honest with you, KBF changes so much crap early on so fast I just got very resistant to rules changes because it was just like, come on, let's slow down and stop changing so much stuff so fast. And, because in a lot of the things that we did, we were the first to do it. We were like over the top anal about things. I can remember finding out after several people had gotten DQ'd for like the top 3, teeth on their PFD not being zipped and little stuff like that, that I was like, come on, man, are we doing that for real? And then, AJ, you have a very fresh perspective on it, the way you did it with not allowing motors and kind of going out on that limb, because at that time, everybody, for the most part, had allowed motors or started to kind of lean in that direction. So that was a huge, like put your head down and do it move. And then Steve, you've been kind of at the forefront of both working with KBF in the past, as well as AJ did the same thing, running bluegrass, and you do TVKA and help with a lot of the other groups and helping Bass Nation grow not only their national series, but also growing the regional scene with the Bass Nation events all over the country, especially in that East Tennessee, Northwest or Northeast Alabama kind of, area. So I want to open the floor up. And I really want to start off with kind of talking about the 4 major categories we're going to talk about tonight, so that folks that are just tuning in can decide whether or not it's worth hanging out. But I definitely think it is. We've all talked about communications and putting some level of restrictions on them, but not taking the fun out of kayak fishing. We've talked about going more towards designated launches, getting rid of the portaging, wade fishing, and some of the gray areas that have led to controversies for almost every tournament series out there at one point or another. And then actually going to a kind of a unified off limits period, but being cognizant of the fact that there's other established series and regional series and groups and things out there that we might have to make minor adjustments here and there with. So to get ready for next season, what I did is I sat down and I read the rules that Steve forwarded me with a couple of things that Bass might be changing. I then went over to the BOS site after we had a long conversation, and I reread the Hobie rules. And after our conversation that we had, where we spent almost 2 hours on the phone together, I was very enlightened to the reasons behind some of the things that you guys did differently. And for the most part, I'm adjusting to the way you guys do it, and there was a time in the past where KBF was like, it's our way or the highway, because we were just trying to establish standardization. And I've got to fall on the sword and say something up front. The conversation with Steve and AJ, not just the one big conversation that we had to talk about to prep for the show, but several conversations with either AJ or Steve independently and then together, really made me realize that, like, I was trying to force everything I love about kayak fishing into kayak fishing competition. Like, I love to paddle into a spot and then get out and wade fish, and I think that's part of kayak fishing. I like to drag my kayak over a beaver dam and get into a spot that nobody else can get to, and I love that for kayak fishing. And then I like to basically, do all those things. I like to launch on the side of the road. I like to do all that part that we all love about kayak fishing. I think it was AJ, though, that made the good point. It's like, yeah, but just because it's part of kayak fishing doesn't mean it has to be part of kayak fishing competition. And that's what really made the light bulb, go off for me. And then we all just had a really good conversation about, just because it's what you love about kayak fishing,
get out and wade fish, and I think
doesn't mean it has to be part of kayak fishing competition, right? So that was the thing that really made the switch in my head flip. So AJ, I want you to talk about like the Hobie position on launches. Launches have always been a point of contention for us at KBF. And since you seem to have your series the most like definitive on that, talk a little bit about what Hobie's done in the past and what you're planning to do in the future when it comes to like the allowable launches for kayak anglers.
Yeah, really for the last few years of the series, we've been really open to any public access or launch. And it was really that open. And we, we shared a sponsor, far wide. We utilized them as a resource for our anglers and kind of use that as the thing. The last few years, even the first 2 years, like it was like, hey, is this spot good? Is this spot good? Is this spot good? I mean, every angler wants to ask us if their spot's good, but that's kind of the thing that they're supposed to be figuring out on their own. So the last couple years, I would just not answer those questions because it turned into anytime someone asked me, now that's their spot that they found and they researched. But if I had to clarify it for them, I had to clarify it for the group. So then people were either not asking me or they were just assuming that a spot wasn't legal for them. And then they'd drive by it during the tournament. There'd be other people there. And it just wasn't like dialed in. It wasn't easy. Like when you grow into a most competitions in competitive fishing, everybody leaves from the same spot and comes back to the same spot. Kayak fishing is not like that. But that doesn't mean that we can't help make that more defined with 25 or 30 or 40 launches. Like here's your spot. We can go ahead and do the research, and a lot of that stuff's already out there. You go to Google Maps and type in public ramps on Guntersville, you're gonna have a pretty good idea of what's legal, really and truly legal. Now there's some little gems in there, but are those gems kind of completely legal, or are they kind of gray, or do you have to drive through some gray to get to completely legal? And there's a lot of variables. And that's the kind of stuff that when you say it's good for kayak fishing, but it might not be good for kayak competition, that's the kind of stuff that we're trying to help dial in. And really and truly, we experimented that on Caddo Lake with the TOC this year. And we were like, these are your 10 or 11, I think it was. And then one of those ramps was open during practice, but then they closed it for hunting during the tournament. So literally the night before the tournament, you had to say, hey, this spot doesn't count. You're not legally allowed to go there. There's a gate that's going to be there. So, there even is still variables in having a list that everybody kind of has to adjust to. But that's really what we're looking at. And, that's something that Vinny at Queen City's done for many years, and his anglers love him for that. And they all communicate. And if they're practicing, they find a spot, they'll communicate with them and be like, hey, this spot's closed now. This spot's a pay launch now. And they've all worked together on it because they understand the importance of everyone having as much of a constant baseline that it should just still be about who can go catch the fish, not who can get enough gray out of a launch spot area to be away from where they either should be or where everybody else is. So we're looking at kind of defining a list for each body of water that we are going to hit.
Steve, what's your plan and approach for Bassmaster for this year with that, for the Bass Nation series?
I've actually already started on similar, pretty much basically what AJ had said, because, we all do share so much with these kind of things. And like you said, to drive his point even more forward, is Vinny's been doing this for a very long time, and it's proven to work. And, when we started talking about these rules and stuff, several months back, I kind of just backed away for a moment. And you know how we are as people, we get tired of something that's pretty damn awesome. We'll just sit back and we'll just be like, well, I want a new car when your car's great. Are we looking at tweaking things just because we're stagnant or we're bored with it, or what things actually really need to be looked at? And this was one of them. Like AJ said, let's make it where it's because of the fish that you caught and not because you could squeeze, something gray, unethical, or just simply doing things not knowing as well, because that's a huge part of our sport. I feel like most of the people who get penalized in my tournaments, it's because of uneducation, or it's a new scenario that had not appeared to them and they didn't know what to do and they didn't reach out. So as a tournament director, revamping these things can actually make our jobs easier. It'll make, like AJ said, it'll make the fishing easier on these people because they don't have so much to have to worry about, so that's what we'll look at as well. I already have 3, because, we only have the 6. I've got 3 already mapped out pretty well, I think. So I was just going to share those around and let the local guys take a look at it and see if I've missed anything. But I think that's where we're going to land too.
So, and again, not to be different for the sake of being different, but I think where I'm going to land, at least for this year, is that we're going to allow any clearly public launch, like anything that's got a launch sign that says it's a boat ramp. We're going to allow any like private marina that you can, as long as everybody can pay to launch there. because there are certain lakes like that's the only places you can launch. But what I'm going to do, I think what I'm pretty much decided I'm going to do is that if you've got that obscure launch that you like, that's in a WMA, like a wildlife management area, and it's there for launching duck boats and kayaks and things like that, but it's not listed anywhere as a launch. If you want it to be approved, then you could submit it and then we will approve it. But once we approve it, then we're going to add that to a list. So instead of listing every launch, we're going to say your 100% dedicated launches are legal, or, designated launches. But if there's additional launches that you want to get approved, you can submit to our website and we'll research it and then we'll approve it. Back to AJ's point, that way we're not doing that same work like 100 times. And I'll give you another thing that happened to us at 3 different tournaments this year. We had people that would just drive around looking for vehicles. And if they saw a recognized vehicle and they didn't think the spot was legal, they would just send us a drop pin and say, I think this person's launching illegally. And I would respond to them and say, okay, then send me why you think it, instead of just being lazy and sending it to me to do all the work. But that was another part of the other side of the coin, is instead of people saying, hey, can I launch here? We had some knuckleheads that would just drive around and send screenshots or take a picture and, hey, this license plate is parked here, and I don't think they should be. But what they were doing is they were letting me do the work to determine if it was legal, so that then they could go back there and launch if it was legal, or they were just trying to be a tattletale, if you want to call it that, right? But it all falls under us not having enough definition to leave that gray area open. So what we're going to do is we're going to define the launches, and if they're not on that list and they're not 100% clear, then you just can't launch there, like AJ said. So pretty much exactly the same. I'm just going to create a system to where anglers can submit a launch if they want to for approval. And if we go through the process of doing the work and we designate it as a designated launch, then we're going to list it, But like for some lakes, I would have a list of, 85 launches if I list all the public launches. So I'm going to give the anglers some level of flexibility, like AJ talked about, from doing the work and finding the spots, but make it a heck of a lot more defined than it has been in the past. And if you've even got to ask, then you need to submit it for approval. If it's not like, there's not a sign that says boat launch or canoe kayak launch or whatever, then we're just going to create a kind of like a supplemental list.
I got a question.
Yes.
So when you get submitted, like your idea to submit for approval, is that going to be a text chat at 11:39 p.m. or is that you got a form for that?
There's going to be a form on the website. There's going to be a link in the event page that you have to submit it, and there'll be criteria that you have to fill out. The GPS coordinates, the whatever. And then the first person that complains to me about, well, I can't find that and I can't do this and I can't do that, I'm like, well, then how the hell do you think I'm going to approve it? Because I got to go out there and do that exact same amount of work. So if you can't give me these 4 pieces of information so I can vet it with the Far Wide app, or if I can, call a state DNR official or whatever, then you're not giving me enough to go on. So, and then once the off limits period kicks in, which we'll talk about in a minute, because we're all 3 in agreement on that as well. But once the off limits period kicks in, there will be no more. There'll be no more launches added, and I'm actually saying allow 7 business days on our event page for approval. So in other words, like you said, you can't submit it to me at 11:59 the night before the off limits period, and then expect me to figure it out in a few minutes and get the event page updated. Because once the event page is locked, we're not changing it, we're not adding stuff to it. That's been a big problem for KBF over the years, and I'm just getting rid of that this year. Once that event page is set up, it's out there, it's done. We're not making any changes to it. It is what it is. You could submit it for next year if you find a really good spot. And if we go back to that same location the following year, or if we go back to that same location 2 years later, or if one of you guys happen to be going, I could be like, hey, here's a good launch site that y'all might want to consider if you go to this area, if that makes sense. So the next one we're going to get into, and I'm going to kick this one to Steve to talk about, mostly because you guys had probably the most visible issue with this. The angler you had that visible issue with is the same one we've had it with in the past. So we call that internally, and it's a term of endearment, so nobody go dogpile on it, but we call it the Drew Gregory clause. When we start looking at these accesses and these places that you can fish and can't fish and things like that. So Steve, talk to me about the Bass Nation Kayak Series approach to portaging and wading and clearing obstacles and things like that. What's your plan for where you guys are moving with that for 23?
I'll touch on some of it because, obviously we're still working on revamping a lot of that language. I do truly believe that, an angler needs to be in their kayak the entire time. An angler brought up a safety point one time. It's like, by you not allowing us, you meaning, tournament directors, not allowing us to leave, I'm trying to get it as close as I can, then you're actually putting us in danger because we have to climb through trees during current to get to the other side of it. Then, you made a very good point. That's dangerous. So stop doing it. So you can't rig your kayak, kind of thing. And that's just the way it is. And as tournament directors, you do have to look out for the people that may not know better. So if you got a newbie trying to do that, on some of the swift current water in Knoxville, they're going to die. They're going to get entangled in that tree. Even if you let them drag this area or that area, depending on the time of year, there's just a lot of things to have to deal with there that you shouldn't have to, And so, we're still looking at that language on it, but I feel like, that's an angler needs to be in there. And as far as dragging over land and things like that, I feel like, for instance, let's just talk Susquehanna, Lake, places like that. I feel like those types of water it's important that you're able to do that. So I think event specific is kind of where that needs to fall.
So I think that AJ, when we had our conversation, probably had the best simple articulation of the concept. You got to be able to paddle to your spot, pedal to your spot, and back. And if you can't, that water's out of bounds. It's off limits. I think that we all brought up the point that I think someone had submitted to. Was it you, AJ, that submitted the question about the pole?
Poling, or even using paddles as poles to get kind of through an area. And a lot of that discussion that we have goes into, that's kind of great. And that's kind of what we meet on and talk about is, well, when you say paddling, do you mean physically paddling and there needs to be X amount of water, or actually using your paddle to push your kayak through? And then is a push pole, which is a common accessory that a lot of kayakers all over the country use, is that okay? We all saw, a professional angler pull his aluminum boat into an area for a Bass Open this year. And that went really public. So, these are the discussions that, we're all having and we're evaluating. And we're, running things off of each other. And, it's kind of unique that it's not just a kayak fishing thing. It's literally these guys in professional bass boat tournaments are having the same type of conversations and evaluating their rules on an event by event basis to try to create as fair of a fishing competition for all the anglers involved. And that's really what we're trying to do. But yeah, that's been our rule from the start, is you got to be able to pedal and paddle in and out of an area for that area to be considered legal during tournament days.
So I think we're not all ready to make a definitive statement on what the rule is, but we've all discussed it. And at least in unison, we're mostly comfortable with paddle, pedal, power, or pole your way into and out of the area. But we've just got to figure out how to universally word it, and then all three adopt it. Is that a fair statement, Steve and AJ?
I think so. And again, I'm still having conversations with other clubs around the country just to get all the perspective, because we don't know it all. We don't. And like what AJ said, Vinny and Josh and them and some of the guys in Texas, there's a club in Virginia that's got some cool stuff going on and that I've talked to recently about some Bass Nation stuff. And I'm like, man, that's why it's good to have open dialogues with things. We've all made it to the highest level of pistivity with one another, I'm sure, a time or two. But, we just kind of always have to circle back around and like what we're doing here.
What did you call that? What did you call that?
Oh, we've made it to the highest level of pistivity. Yeah. That was Robin Harris, an old comedian from House Party. That old man was funny. But so anyway, yeah. But And but that's why, you know, we're all doing this here. You know, it's not easy, it's not fun, it's aggravating to have to go through this kind of stuff, but we all do it together because, you know, every angler, no matter what they fish, deserve to have good, clear rules, most importantly, that are enforced from January 1 until the end of a season. And when there's discrepancies or questions, that it gets voiced and researched and contacted and handled the way that it needs to be done in a respectful manner. And I think that's what everybody wants going forward, you know. And so, but yeah, I feel like that's where we'll probably land on is like you said, as soon as we get the language all fancied up.
And I think probably the other thing that's key to point out is that we've all tried to make universal rules that applies to everything. And then there's always the exception. Well, let's just identify that in the rules and say, okay, and on a case-by-case basis, there can be exceptions to these rules in the event-specific rules. And so I think when we had our conversation, AJ brought that up, like, hey, we're going to have these rules, but we're going to have certain provisions that you can do in the river event, say the Susquehanna event or this, that, and the other. And that's smart. And to me, you know, one of the biggest mistakes I made this year, trying to be the guy that gives everybody as much opportunity as possible, as I had these ridiculously wide open boundaries for the national championship. Now, in my mind, I'm still saying I love that kind of getting in there and digging and finding the spots. But what I really had to step back and look at is that as tournament organizers, as tournament directors, promoters, you know, whatever we want to call ourselves, whatever, you know, umbrella we're under, we're equally responsible to every angler in the tournament as we are to any angler in the tournament. And I think to a certain extent, a lot of times I ended up getting my ear bent by the vocal minority instead of the silent majority. And we ended up kind of leaning these tournaments more towards that upper 10, 12, 15% of kayak anglers who have these certain things they want to do. But it always is also those same situations that lead to the gray area that leads to 50% or more of the field confused about, was the rule really broken or not? And when we don't universally protect the integrity of kayak fishing, which is what's led to the pistivity, Steve, thanks for that word, by the way. In most cases, we've all had that. I've got my stake in the moon. You've got your stake in the moon. AJ's got his stake in the moon. And we're all trying to protect the integrity of kayak fishing competition because we care that much about the sport. And so to me, where I really had to back up and look at the perspective was, and I think just a random angler off the cuff conversation or comment at the national championship really made the light bulb go off for me. A guy said, hey, so this whole thing where this guy's fishing down a river and down another river, I mean, is he even truly fishing in this event anymore? And I was like, damn, like sometimes the simplest way to put something has the biggest impact. And that angler made a good point. What I didn't consider when I was saying that the boundaries are as far as you can paddle is that these hardcore anglers are going to take that to the ultimate extreme. Okay, so I can go down this river till it runs into another river and take that river to another river. And well, shit, it all ultimately goes to the ocean. So, and technically the Atlantic Ocean is inbounds at some point. You know what I mean? So I had to get a lot more, eat a big old piece of humble pie and realize these open boundaries are toxic for the sport if I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing at the level that I'm doing it. So I think three things are really going to be key here. One, I think we're all going to have more established boundaries because we've all had, in one case or another, an angler who's tried to, eke that edge. I remember one of the Hobie events, an angler got DQ'd up on Kentucky Lake trying to skirt the line. And, we had the Drew Gregory incident this year, and we've had, oh my God, we've had a number of incidents. I personally had to go paddle a creek one time after a national championship because there was question about whether Drew was inbounds, and I had to paddle the whole damn thing just to make sure. But that still doesn't satisfy that angler or that competitor that says, but is that even the same thing as what we're trying to do here? And I agree with that angler's assessment. And then when we all had our conversation, the spirit of this competition is to have a competition with as level and as fair a playing field as possible. And so we can't cater to 3 to 5% of the anglers who are this uber hardcore that have this certain mindset. And I'm going to be straight up with you guys. After our conversation, one of the things that I really digested even more afterwards, personally, is that, shoot, some of the things that I love about kayak fishing would probably be better if those things weren't exploited by tournament kayak fishing. Like if some of those places were out of bounds, you know, some of those Gucci spots that everybody goes to, like Steve and I, you know, we've talked about a few places on Guntersville that have just been completely blown out. And, you know, AJ, I'm sure you guys have had the same thing, but to a certain extent, we could stay better stewards of the sport if we don't literally exploit every possible little gem in a fishery, you know what I mean? By allowing anglers to go out there, you know, and rape the resource, if you will. Because again, we're all conservationists, we're all doing all that stuff. But like tailgating is part of football. But that doesn't mean the players get to go out in the parking lot and tailgate, right? They don't even get that experience part of it. So there's certain things that are part of our sport that just shouldn't be part of the competition part of our sport. And I appreciate you bringing that up in our conversation, AJ, because literally that has rung up like a bell in my head since we've had our conversations. Like, but is it need to be? It was not the conversation we three had together. It was the one you and I had before the TOC. Mm-hmm. Where you're like, but does it really need to be part of competition? And I'm like, damn, that's a good point. So I think by establishing better boundaries, we're going to get rid of some of these portaging scenarios by getting rid of or by more clearly defining that you have to be in your watercraft, whether it's paddling, pedaling, poling, whatever, you still got to be in your watercraft. That's going to get rid of a lot of that gray area because it's going to get rid of some of the portaging question is now out of the window. The wading question is now out of the window. And I hung on to the portaging and wading thing for a long time because I love the river fishing component of a lot of events. And Steve mentioned the whole safety thing. I'm not a big fan of an angler catching a smallmouth on a river and then having their head down, you know, taking a picture while they're floating downstream and end up in a strainer. But again, they just have to take that into account. We have to brief them on it and say, if you catch a fish, don't be floating downstream, not looking where you're going, wedge on the bank, scoot your kayak up on the shore, put your heel out, but you can't leave, you know, drop an anchor, do something. And so to me, that was a very good point that you made, Steve. We can't do everything for the whole series based on one possible worst case scenario. In fact, we should be bringing that worst case scenario up and telling anglers, be prepared. If your skill set doesn't allow you to go into those types of fisheries, don't go there. You know what I mean? Like we've had a couple of anglers in the national championship flip their kayak in one of the rivers. And the guy was like, yeah, just it was my first time fishing a river. And I'm thinking, it's your first time ever fishing a river and you were on that river? What the heck? You know? So if we just shrink the boundaries some and make it to where all the skill sets are equally represented in the playing field, then I think we'll have a better outcome. AJ, I'm going to kick this one to you because you made a lot of good points when I brought up in our conversation that we were going to get restrictive on communications. This time you were actually advocating for part of what makes our sport what it is, to stay in the rules, right? So initially I had drafted a thing that I sent to you guys that said, let's get rid of all communications during tournament hours for anything that provides a competitive advantage, that has anything more than safety or logistics. You can't talk about it. So AJ, talk to me a little bit about your thought process and philosophy on what should be acceptable and what shouldn't be acceptable when it comes to communications, you know, during a tournament. We're never going to stop anglers from talking in the hotel, riding together in the truck, you know, doing that kind of thing. But talk to me about, you know, your thought process on like what communications should be allowed and shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, and you know, I think the theme that a lot of people that are watching can see is that the verbiage isn't exactly defined yet, but we're getting closer to that. So by no means is this a full-on rule change, but it's getting to that, and we are, you know, we think that some of the device communication in tournaments is getting a little out of hand. And that's one of the things that we all agree on, that for a strategical advantage in that very specific term is something that we're all kind of evaluating coming into this next season. But one of the things that I think is really important is to still be able to communicate when you're around somebody. And even though you're not really trying to give them a statistical advantage at times, you might be, and not even realizing it. But when you have hundreds of people on a body of water or an area, especially if you go to a smaller legal launches, you're going to have more people in more areas sharing more water. And being able to communicate through that is extremely important to not just kayak fishing, but to any sort of, sportsmanship on the water with anybody. There needs to, and we all wish that bass boaters did a better job communicating with us, like, hey, I'm going this way. I'm going, a lot of times that we are literally invisible to them, but we're not invisible to other kayak anglers. And, if you're on a grass flat or if you're working points or a ledge, even if you don't know that person, that's kind of the cool thing about this sport. It's like, hey, I'm over here making this cast and I'm probably going to stay here all day. But as long as you don't get in this little, casting range of me, I'm all about you doing this. And you can put your back of your kayak on mine and cast the other direction. But this is my target. And the other person can be so receptive to that at times. And a lot of times you end up helping them out, not even realizing it, just trying to communicate around your situation so they don't be that person that we hear about on a blog or a podcast the week after the event. So I think being able to have that sportsmanship communication and that being able to be strategic with what you plan to do and what you're doing can avoid a lot of the issues that we've been having. So I think that's important and something we want to keep in. But I think calling somebody that's on a different end of the lake and saying, hey, I'm using this, or, hey, you should get over here and do that. I think that's kind of the stuff that we're looking to, definitely reduce, if not eliminate, moving forward. But I think that on-water communication, at least in certain scenarios and to certain extents, is really something that we want to leave in for all of those reasons.
Yeah, and I think the initial draft that we came up with at KBF and by submitting it to a lot of the ambassador groups is getting rid of the wolf pack fishing, where one guy goes out and they're all fishing in different areas, and then whoever develops a pattern first picks up the phone and calls his buddy, who calls his buddy, who calls his buddy, and then they're all thanking each other in the top 10. Yeah, if it wasn't for AJ telling me about that 6 foot deep worm bite, I'd have still been throwing a chatterbait at 10 o'clock and I didn't have a fish and blah, blah, blah. And so to me, that's not what competition should be anyway. You should be out there competing as an individual. If you, like you said, if you happen to be next to an angler, and if you, and I had this happen maybe a month ago, 2 weeks ago, three weeks ago, right before our conversation, I was out drifting a spot in Guntersville. Guy pulled up in a bass boat. He said, any luck? And I said, no. He says, you mind if I get in here? I said to him, hey, look, I'm drifting this grass line by changing the motor head to drift this grass line. Just do me a favor, if you don't mind, just don't anchor on this grass line or go around me, or you can get in and we can just do the drift together. And if that was a tournament, am I sharing competitive information with that angler? Absolutely, because I'm saying there's a grass line right here. I'm obviously telling you I'm fishing it, so therefore there's fish on it. You know what I'm saying? And so that kind of communication, I think, falls under sportsmanship. But we've got to figure out how to word it. And I think we're really close. I think all three of us are close. I think the stuff that I read from Bass Nation was the closest to what I would consider finished. And so I think when the three of us kind of bounce it around and tweak it, we'll come out with something very similar to what they have. But the spirit of the thing is we can never eliminate all communication. But it's disheartening for those folks that are out there putting up their hard-earned money, their travel time, their vacation time, their time away from home. And they not only have to go out there and get beat by, and I'm only throwing these names out there, not saying they do it, but their names, the Jody Queens, the Russ Snyders, the Cody Miltons, and all these folks. But then they got to get beat by those guys sharing information. And it's discouraging. So therefore they don't even go to another event because they're like, man, I'm not in the clique, or that's, all that psychology stuff that's out there. And we want people to feel like it's a level playing field as much as possible. Are those people going to talk when they get off the water? Absolutely. A lot of them share hotel rooms or campsites, or they drive to the water together. It's next to impossible to not have some information bleed over. But I think the idea is to limit it to sportsmanship type conversations and get rid of the pattern sharing, type information that provides a competitive advantage that's communicated via electronic device, either a cell phone or a radio, or a Facebook message or something to that effect. So I think we're all pretty much on the same sheet with that. Steve, do you have anything to add from any of your conversations with other groups that could be enlightening or helpful?
Well, I wish we'd have had this all along. I'd have saved about $600 in radios because I'd buy one and my buddy would lose it, or the freaking, they wouldn't be waterproof. But that was just something we did early on because, we were newbies and it was just cool. But by no means did it ever give me one second of an advantage. Check my PayPal account, you can tell that. But no, so far, I think that's probably, in my opinion, it's hard to rank, 1, 2, and 3. I think every point that we're all looking at revamping are equally as important. But I think this is probably the one that gets the most burn when it comes to people. I don't want to say complaining in a negative way because it's a true complaint and it should be one. And I think, we had mentioned about, like the portaging and the things that we all love about kayaking not being really, really necessary in the sport anymore. It's because it's changing. It's gotten so big. There's so much on the line anymore that I think, you do have to start shrinking things back. And AJ made a good point. 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about some things that we had in the works. And he was like, do this with it and then start doing this with it. And that seems to be the best process to handle these kind of things. And I think that's what will happen here, and it'll make everything better for it. So, but yeah, everyone, I think you can call any state in the nation, and that's always one that's going to come up, I think, is the conversation stuff. So,
yeah. And it's probably the number one thing that gets mentioned to me after a tournament, or somebody sends a screenshot of somebody complaining, or somebody will literally just walk up to me and say, hey man, look, I love these series and I would love to keep donating my money, but I can't beat that guy or that guy or that guy on his any given day, but I sure as heck can't beat all three of them, sharing a pattern, and so again, I think that some of that's still going to happen because it's unavoidable, but just blatantly allowing it on the water in the middle of the tournament is problematic. And I think we're all in agreement that needs to be reined in to a certain extent.
Yeah.
The last one,
the challenge, let me interject this. The challenge is going to come. Let's say it does happen inadvertently from someone. Like, are we DQing these people? Are we giving them a warning? I mean, not like we've talked about, not every infraction gets you disqualified from a tournament. There's penalties to be levied. And I think maybe we can't all get that going this year, but in the future, I see us having to come up with some things like that because, if an angler takes off without their red and green line on, say their battery went dead on and didn't recognize it. Well, if they get reported, do I DQ that person for 10 minutes of driving without a light, or do I beach them for an hour or half? I don't know. I don't know the answers to all of that, but I think we got to get those figured out because with the level of competition and you got to there's a thin line between rules for me, because I hate them. I don't like people telling me what to do, but I understand they're necessary to have civilization. But snitching's really hard, but people have to get that connotation off of themselves when they're reporting something in the tournament. That is not snitching. That is safeguarding that tournament series that you're fishing. So when that person finally does get the courage to report something because they get treated the way they need to be as someone that's actually helping the series, what do we tell that person? Like this is a rules infraction. This person's not disqualified. So we got to kind of start thinking about that too, I think, because the more we get into this with these payouts and the level of competition and new people coming into the sport that don't know all of the good natured stuff that we all do from the past history, these things are going to start. I feel like there's going to be more reporting of things going forward. So we got to figure that out too.
I want to weigh in on that a little bit because I actually addressed the competitors at the national championship, not contradicting what you said, but I did clarify the sportsmanship component of the telling on someone thing. And so here's what I said, and I'm just going to leave it at that because I still agree with what I'm about to say. we had an angler in a tournament before the national championship watch another angler take his PFD and set it on the back of his PFD on his chair. And he said, if that guy set his PFD on the back of his chair, he's probably going to hop in the kayak and forget about it. So he stood over to the side with his cell phone recording it, waited for the angler to get in his kayak, and he scooted away from the shoreline and then sent me the video and said, hey, this guy was in his kayak, launched, and wasn't wearing his PFD. He needs to be DQ'd. And I said, well, is that the whole video? And he was like, no. I said, well, send me the part where you were telling him he should put his PFD on, and then I won't DQ you for sportsmanship. He was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, dude, you stood there with your camera ready. You had your phone out waiting for the opportunity to try to get another angler DQ'd because you knew he was probably going to push away with his PFD not on. Come on, man. And so to a certain extent, we have to be real about this stuff. Like if you see an angler that's inadvertently breaking a rule, give him a heads up. You know what I mean? Don't sit there like a hawk waiting for the opportunity, or a buzzard waiting for your opportunity to pounce. And so we just got to get a lot more into intent. And I think that the language that you have in yours is the intentional sharing and the intentional this. And I do believe that unintentional, I mean, how many times have we paddled up to a boat dock and an old boy sitting on the boat dock thinking he's wanting to sound like he knows what he's talking about? Like, boy, they're killing it on a purple worm today. And if the rule was you couldn't get any communication, you'd be like, damn, now I got to go, call the tournament director to DQ myself or whatever. But I think we're close. So for you guys out there that are listening, I want to get into the one more topic. That way we do have a moment for question and answer at the end. And I want to keep this thing under an hour out of respect for y'all's time and everybody else's. But the last one, and we were probably the most resistant to it in KBF because we've got great relationships with hosts, long-standing relationships with hosts, and they want heads in beds. They want people to come to these events, as much as they can. They want to see those kayaks there. They want to see the people in the town and that kind of thing. And so when you make an off-limits period, a lot of times the ones that help us bring these events, help Bass, help Hobie, help KBF bring those events to the town are like, wait a minute, you're limiting the people that can come here. You're limiting the economic impact. And so we have all had to kind of walk a slippery slope of understanding that there's potentially should be an off-limits area, but simultaneously making it fair and, being respectful of these hosts that are investing in helping us, bring these events, whether it's financial or facilities or meals or whatever they're contributing, they're helping. And so we've got to be respectful of that. But I do think it's like everything else. We started out like this, and now we've got to kind of neck it down. But true off-limits periods and truly defined, practice periods has been something that I've heard from the first day that we started doing a tournament. The first ever kayak bass fishing open that we did on Santee Cooper, the first question on the forum was, when's the lake off limits? I'm not kidding you. Like all the way back to the first event we ever announced. Okay, when's it off limits? Because that's what people expect from the tournament series that come before us, the bass series that come before us, that there's always a defined off limits period and there's a defined practice period. And so I initially recommended a 30-day period. And then, so basically 30 days before the event starts, it's off limits. And then the weekend before, so that Saturday and Sunday, the Saturday before the event, it comes in and it's open for that full week. And Steve, you actually mentioned something when we were talking about it that you were like, I like that because that includes the weekend before for that, blue collar, worker or that person that can't take the whole week off. They can run over there the weekend before if they're within striking distance, get a little pre-fishing in. They don't have to be there on the weekdays. And then AJ actually said, well, look, I really don't know that the 30 days works. I'm more along the lines of 21 days. And then Steve, you reiterated, we've got a couple of events already out of respect for some of our partners that are more in that 21-day window. So I just actually just said, hey, you know what? That sounds really good to me. I just wanted to do something to kind of address it, to make people feel like it's not futile to go fish an event because all the locals are going to dominate it, which if you look at the history of events, very few locals have ever won the majors. It's just, it is what it is. It's always the perception, but it's almost never the reality. In fact, this year, when we did have an off-limits period in California, I think the locals had an advantage because the lake was off limits and they were the only ones that knew anything about it. So to me, you got to have it to where it's open for a certain period of time, but I do like the close for a certain period of time. So I just went with the direction that you guys had already, pretty much agreed on and felt more comfortable with, which was that 21-day off-limit period, starting 21 days from the start of the event, but then 7 days. So basically it's 14 days that it's off-limits and 7 days that it's back. Are both of you guys still kind of in that same window with the exception of events where we may have to adjust that for conflict with other major series or things like that?
It sounds very fair to me, and I've discussed it, with the people at Bassmaster as well. And like we've all communicated with this sort of revamping that's going on there, they're really in tune with what, because before I even took the job, it wasn't just me that they had talked to. They talked to quite a few anglers. I'm sure they talked to both of y'all and just your not tournament director angler. They've gotten input from them and everything. And it seems like this is, is a pretty fair compromise. And I really enjoyed the 3 days that they have currently. But like we discussed, if you've got, just take myself, for instance, where I'm at now, I can't make it and fish, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or whatever. I would literally have to go the weekend before. So I started looking over leaderboards in like Tennessee and Georgia Bass Nation, looking at those people and carved out of, I think we had 140 unique anglers in Georgia last year and 190 something in Tennessee. Tennessee, I think I counted 25 to 27 people who could literally go do the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday probably. And the rest are just kind of, flapping in the wind. So they're kind of out of luck. And just through, message boards and groups and things, the Hobie page, the KBF page, the KBN page, the TVKA page, all these pages have chatter about it. And the communication, no matter what way it comes, those are still people's opinions. And whether, there's people who get, kind of, well, if you don't fish these big events, you just because you don't get to fish them doesn't mean that your point isn't very valid. And I've listened to so many discussions and I've seen people that I've never heard of, I've never seen on a Hobie, a KBF, or a Bassmaster board bring up some really freaking good points so I started jotting them down. And this was one of them. He was like, I don't have the money to fish right now, but I'm going to probably next year. So I want to be able to know that I can come and pre-fish when I can't during the work week, so to speak. So felt like this was the best way to do it. And then like we mentioned, the 21 days kind of, they're going forward this year. There's already tournament series who have put their schedules out. So, we need to be flexible where we can, so if it's a day or so or whatever, but which, like AJ said, we've got these rules and then we got the event page. So on the event page will be your pertinent information. Here's your pre-fishing cutoff. Here's your official practice start date. We'll have all those dates there, all the times and everything. So I think it should be a pretty easy transition. I'm pretty confident that's where it can land. And then, like we said earlier, if for some reason, you guys are against that and we had to change it, we'll do that as well so that we're all on the same page here with that.
Well, and I also think that if we all do it together, we all then get different versions of feedback. And so when we get ready to reevaluate, we do the same thing we did when we came together before, which is like, well, here's the feedback I heard. Okay, here's the feedback I heard. And I think we're all reasonable people and we can come to the consensus on what makes the most sense for the sport. But I'll give you one example. As I was kind of trying to map out the calendar, starting to map out a lot of the ambassador stuff and things like that, the Ambassador Series Championship, because it moved from Veterans Day weekend to the spring, where we're trying to move our national championship, it's already inside the bubble. There's no way in the world of kayak fishing right now you can put something in December and it not touch 15 things, right? Because that's just how much opportunity we all have now. So for the Ambassador Series Championship, March 18th, I'm not going to have any off limits period for that, because if I did, nobody could fish the Bass Nation Series. Nobody could fish the NACA event, the TVKA event, the Yak and Grass event. That's all that same weekend. And that would be stupid, right? To say, I'm going to come in and expect everybody to move their schedules. But I think as we develop these off limits periods, I think the clubs and the groups and us as series directors will work together to accommodate those things. And to a certain extent, I also think it's going to help with a little bit of relief on some of the fisheries. So there's not like a dang on tournament, every weekend for 18 weeks. You know what I'm saying? It's going to give a little bit of a breather, and we'll just kind of spread things around a little bit better. So that's the off limits thing. I think we're all on the same sheet pretty much on comms, on launches, with maybe a few tweaks on a couple of them. The portaging, waiting, access, all we really have to define is the language on the polling. Really what it boils down to is we all agree paddle, pedal, or power your way in, but we've got to define the language on what does polling mean? Does that mean you're pushing through and you're scooting, or does that mean you've got two poles in the water and you're doing the skier thing and slurching your way through? So we've just got to kind of define that a little bit for the folks that are listening. That's kind of the last thing. My goal is to get with these guys offline, get this thing nailed down, try to release it the first week of January at the latest, so that those events that are at the end of January, there's plenty of time for people to prepare for it. But we've pretty much talked about the consensus tonight. You're going to have to paddle to your spot and back. You're not going to be able to portage. You're not going to be able to wade fish. There'll be some events where there's specific rules that will allow that because of the type of water. And I think that's going to be across the board with all three series. And then we're going to adopt an off limits period that's semi-rigid, 21 days with 7 days practice, but it's going to be flexible where it needs to be. If there's two major national events that overlap each other or something to that effect, or a major established regional or club event that's been long standing, we don't want to just come in and crap on those, those things that truly are the lifeblood of the sport. And then the comms, we just need to nail down the language on the whole intent and sportsmanship components of it. So unless you guys have anything specific you want to talk more about, I'd like to let Randy kind of open the floor up for a few questions and see if we can throw some questions up there. And I guess I'll play referee and decide who answers the question. Most likely I'm just going to kick it to you two knuckleheads. So.
All right, gentlemen. Well, that was actually a lot of really good conversation. There's a lot of chatter going on in the comment section on all the platforms right now. So make sure you guys go back and take a look at what's kind of going on afterwards at behind the scenes to see what's going on. But here's a question from Todd Patrick. This is to the three of you. For this potential communication rules change, would it be basically not allowing KFL to be part of your event simultaneously at the same time? Because they do a lot of live shows and chatter and talk and communication. So what would that do for teaming up with you guys at your events?
Any one of you guys want to jump on that grenade first, or do you want me to?
I don't mind. I mean, essentially, depending on how the verbiage of the rule states, the guys that are fishing both events would need to follow the rule of Hobie. And if that means that you can't go and broadcast, then that's what it means. But essentially, I don't think that's really what it's saying. I think that if you can get by a day of competing and not calling your buddy and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing during the 8 hours of fishing, you can still go live. I mean, we want our anglers to go live. We want our anglers to share their experiences. That's not what we're trying to get away from. But we are looking to get away from some of the, hey, so-and-so, come over here and do this on this spot, or I'm doing this here, maybe you should try it there, during competition hours. So you have 8 hours where you need to not tell your buddy how your fishing is going and kind of the direction that we're trying to go. So, I'm aware of how KFL goes, but I also understand that there's variables there. But if you're going to try to be in multiple events, ultimately you got to follow the rules for all of the events. And that's ultimately what we're going to follow for the Hobie series specifically.
Yeah, we will at Bassmaster as well, because like what AJ shared, we do want you to go live. We want you to do your updates for your social media. We know that's how your sponsors continue to support you. But every time you go live, that's a publicly available thing that someone can look at. So, I love the aspect of the KFL where you are a team and you do compete together, and everybody we talk to loves fishing it. but that applies, when it's standalone tournament, as AJ said, you have to adhere to the rules of every kayak tournament that you're in that day. So,
yeah. And we've all agreed that the whole broadcasting thing is not only not going to be prohibited, but it's going to be encouraged. But I will bring up something that one of the people in our ambassador series leadership group brought up. Okay, so what if a guy goes and broadcasts to a private group? Well, okay, that's obviously not acceptable. It has to be public. So if you're in the fishing club and you guys have a 5-person private group and you go live and broadcast to that group, but you've got to be a member of that group to see it, that's not public. The public thing is actually really well defined in the Bass Nation series, and we're just going to grab that and use it in our rules. Just like people have used KBF rules in the past, we're just going to start using the best language from all of the series for each of the series where it makes sense. So I agree. As long as it's live is public, and public information is basically available to everyone. Anyone can tune into that live stream. But to AJ's point, there's going to be no prohibition from KFL fishing in an event as long as they follow the rules of the event that they're fishing in no differently than they have in the past. That's just kind of how that works. So.
Yeah, if I were in there though, I wouldn't push the envelope of while I'm live streaming, I'm catching them, on a double willow leaf with a pink truck. I just wouldn't push that kind of stuff. I mean, be sensible,
right.
Right. I mean, it's just.
But to each his own, as long as it's public.
Yeah. Just be sensible.
We see the pros a lot of times getting their patterns hacked all the time by the live, bass and Major League Fishing and whatever. So, good question, Todd. All right, Randy, what else we got?
Can you be on the water all during the cutoff time, just graphing and creating waypoints, etc.?
No, that's pre-fishing.
No.
Off limits. That's like trespassing and going, I wasn't really trespassing. I was just looking around, So all information gathering is part of fishing. So, no, you can't be on the water.
Yeah, on the water. And we actually had to refine what being off the water in our practice period meant, because people would be like, well, I stopped fishing, but it took me 2 hours to get back to the ramp. And it's like, well, did you turn your depth finder off? Did you did you stop looking at the banks? Did you stop?
Close your eyes? Yeah.
So we redefined when you had to be off the water specifically because of people trying to push the verbiage in the gray. But any aspect of on the water is part of pre-fishing. Now, I mean, we even allowed in the TOC this year, you could go to Caddo Lake. You could go to Caddo. You just couldn't get on the water. So if you wanted to drive around and look at the same 10 ramps from the ramp, or drive over a bridge and look, that was allowed. That's not getting on the water. And so we were very specific about that, and we will be in those things as well. You can't make a town off limits, or a 2-hole state corridor off limits. But you can make it pretty simple. You can't get on the water during a certain period of time.
Yeah. No pontoon boat cookouts with the family. I mean, that counts too. So.
Right. I'm not out here looking around. I'm just cooking hot dogs. Yeah. All right, Randy, we got any more?
No, sir. You guys are good. You answered the really good prevalent ones. I mean, I know you guys will go back and look at some of the comments and stuff throughout the rest of the week here, but definitely did a great job explaining those 4 rules. So go ahead, Chad.
Hey, guys, listen, AJ, Steve, thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your schedule to be here tonight to have this conversation. I think we're in a really good spot in our sport. I think we all have kind of gotten sick of the drama and the infighting and all the BS, and that's another reason that we've come together to kind of do this unification thing. More opportunities for anglers is more opportunities for anglers. The motorcycle club mentality where we're all trying to tear each other down or say, meet me at the parking lot for a shootout and all that stuff is crazy. And so to me, I'm really excited about this upcoming season. I think it's going to be a defining year for kayak fishing competition. I really do. I think every series is going to flourish. And I think it's awesome to see the anglers that are fishing all 3 different series and getting this accolade over there and that accolade over here. And, I'm excited when a buddy wins a tournament, or a person that I've seen grow up through the sport wins a tournament. I don't care if it's Hobie or Bass or KBF or, you know what I mean, like a Tuesday nighter, you know, in the parking lot of their local deal. In fact, I'm going to try to fish some of those, you know, within reason this year because I'm not going to travel as much. But yeah, I think that this year realistically could be the best year that we've ever had in this sport. But it's up to us to be stewards of it. It's up to us to have civil conversations, not knockdown dragouts, because we are representing our community from the outside looking in when we're having those conversations. And we have to remember that whether you're digging your heels in trying to make your point or not, everybody else is seeing both of your sides and seeing how you conduct yourself. So let's conduct ourselves as professionals in the sport because we are representing what we all love, which is kayak fishing. So Steve, AJ, thank you guys so much. I appreciate it. Let's connect sometime later this week to go over the language, try to get this stuff finalized so we can let folks digest it as much as possible before we jump back into the 2023 season. And yeah, you guys have a great night. Merry Christmas. Hope you all have a happy new year and be safe. Don't get out on the icy roads unless you absolutely have to if you're in an area where that's a problem. And thank you all for tuning in. Thank you guys for joining me. And yeah, we'll see y'all next week.
Thank y'all. Good luck to everybody this season.
Hey guys, I'm Chad Hoover with Kayak Bass Fishing. If you're looking to get in on the exciting sport of kayak fishing yourself, check out kayakbassfishing.com. Yeah. Boom! Oh, yes.
What a freaking toad.
So whether you want to find out more about competitive kayak fishing and kayak fishing tournaments or just looking to learn more to make yourself a better angler, head over to kayakbassfishing.com and join today.